Thomas Brennan had built his life like a fortress, methodical, calculated, and impenetrable. At 38, he owned 3 successful auto repair shops across the city, each one a testament to his ability to fix what others had given up on. His hands, permanently stained with motor oil despite countless washings, were steady and sure. Those same hands had once cradled his newborn daughter, signed his marriage certificate, and built everything he thought mattered. The suburban house on Maple Street looked like something from a magazine. 2 stories of pristine white siding, a perfectly manicured lawn, and Rebecca's prized rose garden that won the neighborhood competition 3 years running. Thomas had bought this house 7 years ago, right after Emma was born. He'd wanted his daughter to grow up somewhere safe, somewhere beautiful. Rebecca Brennan moved through their home like she owned every inch of it, which, technically, she did. Half of everything Thomas had earned was hers by law, a fact she'd reminded him of during their increasingly frequent arguments. At 34, she was still striking, with auburn hair that caught the light just right and green eyes that had once made Thomas's heart race. Now those same eyes looked through him like he was furniture. "You're working late again tonight?" Rebecca asked, not looking up from her phone as Thomas grabbed his coffee mug from the kitchen counter. It was 6:30 a.m., and he'd already been up for an hour, going over the books for the shops. "Henderson's transmission needs to be finished today. Mrs. Patterson needs her car back." Thomas studied his wife's face, searching for any hint of the woman he'd married. "Why? Did you have plans?" Rebecca's fingers danced across her phone screen. "Just book club. Wine night with the girls." Her voice was casual, practiced. Too practiced. Emma burst into the kitchen wearing mismatched socks and carrying her stuffed elephant, Mr. Peanuts. At 6 years old, she was a perfect blend of both parents. Thomas's dark hair and determined chin, Rebecca's expressive eyes and quick smile. "Daddy, can you drive me to school today? Please." Emma climbed onto Thomas's lap, wrapping her small arms around his neck. "Mommy said she's too busy." Thomas glanced at Rebecca, who was still absorbed in her phone. "Of course, sweetheart. Go get your backpack." As Emma scampered away, Thomas noticed Rebecca smile at whatever was on her screen. It wasn't the polite smile she gave him anymore. This was different. Softer. Intimate. "Funny text?" he asked. Rebecca's head snapped up, the smile vanishing. "Just Jenny being Jenny. You know how she is." She slipped the phone into her purse with deliberate casualness. "I should get ready for work." Thomas watched her leave, noting how she took her phone with her. Rebecca never used to take her phone to the bathroom. She never used to smile at texts like that. And she definitely never used to lie about who was messaging her. The drive to Emma's school was filled with her chatter about upcoming picture day and how Tommy Rodriguez had tried to kiss her friend Sarah during recess. Thomas listened, filing away these precious moments while a cold certainty settled in his chest. Something was wrong with his marriage, and he was pretty sure he knew what it was. After dropping Emma off, Thomas didn't go straight to the shop. Instead, he drove past the law firm where Rebecca worked as a paralegal. Her silver Honda Civic was already in the parking lot, but so was a black Mercedes SUV he didn't recognize. Through the large windows of the building, he could see Rebecca talking animatedly with a tall man in an expensive suit. The man was mid-40s, silver at his temples, with the kind of confidence that came from never having to fix anything with his own hands. As Thomas watched, the man placed his hand on Rebecca's lower back, a gesture too intimate for colleagues, too familiar for friends. Thomas sat in his truck for 20 minutes, watching them, watching how his wife leaned into the man's touch, watching how she laughed at whatever he whispered in her ear, watching his marriage crumble in real time through a law firm window. His phone buzzed. A text from Rebecca. "Working through lunch today? Don't wait up for dinner either. Big case coming up." Thomas deleted the message without responding and drove to his shop. He had customers depending on him, employees counting on their paychecks, and a daughter who still believed her parents loved each other. Some things could wait. Some things couldn't. But Thomas Brennan never forgot anything. And he was very good at fixing things that were broken, even when that meant taking them apart completely first. Chapter 2. The Art of Observation. 3 weeks of careful watching had given Thomas all the confirmation he needed. Rebecca was having an affair with someone from her law firm, and she was being careless about it. She'd started staying late 3 nights a week, had changed her perfume, and most telling of all, she'd become kinder to him, the guilty kindness of someone trying to overcompensate. Thomas had always been methodical. It's what made him successful in business, and he was discovering in surveillance. He'd learned that the black Mercedes belonged to Roland Westfield, a divorce attorney who transferred to Rebecca's firm 6 months ago. He'd learned that Roland was recently divorced himself, paying hefty alimony to an ex-wife in California. He'd learned that Roland had a reputation for being charming, ruthless, and very good at helping wealthy clients hide assets during divorce proceedings. The irony wasn't lost on Thomas. His wife was sleeping with a divorce lawyer. "Dad, you're burning the pancakes." Emma's voice snapped Thomas back to the present. It was Saturday morning, and he was supposed to be making their traditional weekend breakfast. The pancakes were indeed charred around the edges. "Sorry, sweetheart." Daddy's mind was somewhere else. He flipped the ruined pancakes into the trash and started over. "Where's Mommy?" "She's upstairs getting pretty. She said she has to go to work for a little bit today." Emma climbed onto her usual stool at the kitchen island. "On Saturday? That's weird, right?" Out of the mouths of babes. "Yeah, that is weird." Rebecca appeared in the kitchen 20 minutes later, wearing a dress Thomas hadn't seen before, black, fitted, and definitely not appropriate for a Saturday at the office. Her makeup was perfect, her hair styled like she was going to dinner, not work. "I'll only be gone a few hours," she said, kissing Emma's forehead but avoiding Thomas's eyes. "Emergency client meeting. On Saturday?" Emma asked, echoing Thomas's thoughts. "Yes, baby. Some clients can only meet on weekends." Rebecca grabbed her purse, her keys, and her phone. "I'll be back by dinner." After she left, Thomas made a decision. He called his brother Mike to come watch Emma. "Everything okay?" Mike asked when he arrived. At 42, Mike was 4 years older than Thomas and had never married. He'd always said watching Thomas's marriage was enough to keep him single forever. "You look like hell. I need to run some errands. Can you watch Emma for a few hours?" Mike studied his brother's face. "What kind of errands?" "The kind you don't ask about." "Oh." Mike nodded grimly. "The Rebecca kind." Thomas didn't answer, but he didn't need to. Mike had always been able to read him. Following Rebecca was easier than it should have been. She drove straight to the Riverside Hotel, a upscale place downtown that charged $300 a night. Thomas parked across the street and watched as Rebecca walked into the lobby like she owned it. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't looking around. This wasn't her first time here. Thomas waited 30 minutes before walking into the hotel himself. The lobby was elegant in that understated way expensive places favored. Marble floors, leather furniture, and staff who were trained to be invisible. He approached the front desk with the confidence of someone who belonged there. "I'm meeting my business partner," he told the young clerk. "Roland Westfield? I think he's in the restaurant." "Oh, Mr. Westfield checked in about an hour ago. Room 412. Would you like me to call up?" "No need. I'll surprise him." Thomas left the hotel without going to the 4th floor. He had what he needed, confirmation and a room number. More importantly, he now knew this was an ongoing arrangement, not a one-time mistake. Rebecca and Roland had a standing reservation. Every Saturday. Emergency client meetings, indeed. He drove home and spent the afternoon playing board games with Emma while Mike watched football. When Rebecca returned at 6 p.m., her hair was slightly mussed despite obvious attempts to fix it, and she smelled like different cologne. "How was work?" Thomas asked over dinner. "Fine. Boring. You know how it is." Rebecca passed the salad to Emma. "What did you two do today?" Daddy seemed sad. Emma announced with the brutal honesty of childhood. He kept staring at nothing. Rebecca's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Sad? Why were you sad, Tom?" Thomas met his wife's eyes across the dinner table, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time in months. She was a stranger wearing Rebecca's face, speaking with Rebecca's voice, but the woman he'd married was gone. Had been gone for a while, probably. "Just thinking about the future," he said. "About what changes might be coming." Rebecca's hand trembled slightly as she took a sip of wine. "What kind of changes?" "Oh, you know. Emma's starting 1st grade soon. The shop's doing well. How different life might look in a year or two." Thomas smiled, and it was the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. How some people might end up exactly where they deserve to be. That night, after Rebecca fell asleep, Thomas sat in his home office and opened his laptop. He had planning to do. Because while his wife might have forgotten who she was married to, Thomas Brennan was about to remind everyone what happened when someone tried to take what belonged to him. He'd built his life carefully, methodically, with precision. He'd rebuild it the same way. after he tore down everyone who'd betrayed him. Chapter 3. The Moment of Truth. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a courier who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Thomas signed for the envelope while Emma ate her cereal, the thick manila package feeling heavier than it should have in his hands. "What's that, Daddy?" Emma asked, chocolate milk dripping down her chin. "Just some business papers, sweetheart. Nothing important." But they were important. 47 pages of legal document that essentially said his wife wanted to take half of everything he'd built and walk away with her lawyer boyfriend. The papers were thorough, professionally prepared, and devastating in their efficiency. Thomas read them twice before calling in sick to work, something he hadn't done in 3 years. He spent the day going through every page with a magnifying glass, making notes, understanding exactly how Rebecca and Roland planned to destroy him. They'd been very clever. The papers requested temporary spousal support, half of all business assets, primary custody of Emma, and the house. They also contained a detailed list of Thomas's assets that was suspiciously accurate, almost like someone with access to his home office had been feeding information to someone else. Rebecca came home that evening with takeout Chinese food and a guilty smile. "I thought we could have a nice family dinner," she said, unpacking containers of Emma's favorite sweet and sour chicken. "Sometimes it's nice to not cook, you know." Thomas watched her bustle around the kitchen, setting out plates and napkins with the careful enthusiasm of someone performing a part. She'd been practicing this scene, he realized. Probably with Roland. Emma chattered through dinner about her day at school, blissfully unaware that her parents were watching each other like gladiators. Rebecca kept glancing at Thomas, clearly waiting for him to mention the papers. When he didn't, her anxiety became almost palpable. "I'm going to give Emma her bath," Rebecca announced after dinner. "Maybe we can talk afterward?" "Sure," Thomas said mildly. "I'll clean up here." While Rebecca was upstairs with Emma, Thomas moved the divorce papers from his office to the kitchen table. He arranged them neatly next to where Rebecca usually sat, then made himself a cup of coffee and waited. Rebecca came downstairs 20 minutes later and froze when she saw the papers. "Tom, sit down, Rebecca." Something in his tone made her comply immediately. Thomas had never spoken to her like that before. Calm, quiet, and absolutely final. "How long?" he asked. "How long what?" But her voice was barely a whisper. "How long have you been fucking Roland Westfield?" Rebecca flinched as if he'd slapped her. Thomas never swore in front of Emma, rarely swore at all. The word hung in the air between them like a blade. "I don't know what." Room 412 at the Riverside Hotel. Every Saturday for the past 2 months. Before that, it was his office after hours. Thomas's voice remained perfectly level. "Emergency client meetings." "Right." Rebecca's face went through several emotions at once: surprise, fear, defiance, and finally, resignation. "It just happened, Tom. We didn't plan it." "Bullshit." Thomas leaned back in his chair. "This," he gestured at the papers, "doesn't just happen. This is planned. This is calculated. This is you and your boyfriend trying to rob me blind. It's not like that. Sign the damn divorce papers." Rebecca suddenly shouted, her composure cracking completely. She slammed her hand on the table, making the papers jump. "Just sign them, and let's get this over with. You can't give me what I need, Tom. You never could. Roland understands me in ways you never will." Thomas stared at his wife, his soon-to-be ex-wife, and felt something cold and final settle in his chest. This was it then. The moment he'd been dreading and preparing for simultaneously. "What you need?" he asked quietly. "You mean money? Because that's what this is about, isn't it? Roland's got expensive tastes, and my auto shops can't compete with a divorce lawyer's income. It's not about money. Everything is about money, Rebecca, especially with divorce lawyers." Thomas picked up a pen and held it over the papers. His hand was steady, but something inside him was shaking with rage so pure it felt like ice water in his veins. Then the kitchen door burst open. "Daddy!" Emma rushed in wearing her favorite purple pajamas, tears streaming down her face. "Daddy, why is Mommy yelling? Are you going away?" Rebecca immediately rushed to Emma, dropping to her knees. "No, baby, Daddy's not going anywhere. Mommy and Daddy were just. Uncle Roland said you were." Emma sobbed, pointing toward the living room. Every adult in the kitchen froze. "Uncle Roland?" Thomas's voice was deadly quiet. "Who is Uncle Roland, Emma?" "He's Mommy's friend who comes over sometimes when you're at work," Emma said through her tears. He said that soon it would just be him and Mommy and me, and you'd go live somewhere else because you don't love us anymore. The silence that followed was absolute. Thomas could hear the kitchen clock ticking, could hear his own heartbeat, could hear Rebecca's sharp intake of breath. When Thomas asked, his voice barely above a whisper, "Does Uncle Roland come over?" Emma wiped her nose on her pajama sleeve. "Lots of times. He brings Mommy flowers and they hug a lot, and he always tells me not to tell you because it's a surprise." Thomas looked at Rebecca, who had gone completely pale. Then he looked toward the living room, where he could see a shadow moving behind the frosted glass of the front door. "Is Uncle Roland here now, sweetheart?" Emma nodded, still crying. "He's in the living room. He told me to stay upstairs, but I heard yelling and got scared." Thomas stood up slowly, his mind working through the implications with mechanical precision. Roland was here, in his house, had been coming to his house regularly while he was at work, had been grooming his daughter to accept him as a replacement father, had been planning to take everything. "Rebecca," Thomas said, his voice so quiet it was almost a whisper, "call your boyfriend into the kitchen. Now. Tom, please. Now." The word came out like a gunshot. Rebecca jumped, then hurried toward the living room. Thomas could hear muffled conversation, then footsteps. Roland Westfield walked into the kitchen like he owned it, wearing a confident smile that faltered when he saw Thomas's expression. He was exactly what Thomas had expected, tall, handsome in a television lawyer way, and utterly lacking in any awareness of the danger he was in. "Tom," Roland said, extending his hand. "I'm glad we can finally meet properly. I think it's time we had an honest conversation about what's best for everyone." Thomas looked at the offered hand, then at Roland's face, then at his daughter's tear-stained cheeks. "You're absolutely right," Thomas said. "It's time for honesty." Then he smiled, and Roland took an involuntary step backward, because Thomas Brennan's smile looked like something sharp and hungry and final. "Let's talk about what everyone deserves." Chapter 4, The Reckoning. Thomas had been wrong about one thing. Roland Westfield wasn't stupid. Arrogant, yes. Entitled, absolutely. But not stupid. The divorce lawyer recognized the change in Thomas's demeanor immediately and shifted into damage control mode. "Listen, Tom, I know this is difficult," Roland said, keeping his voice measured and professional. "But we're all adults here. Sometimes marriages don't work out, and the most important thing is making sure Emma has a stable transition." Stable transition. Thomas repeated the words like he was tasting something bitter. "Is that what you call fucking my wife in my bed while my daughter is downstairs?" Emma gasped. Rebecca made a strangled sound. Roland's practiced composure cracked just slightly. "Tom, please. Emma doesn't need to hear. Emma doesn't need to hear a lot of things." Thomas cut him off. "She doesn't need to hear her mother's boyfriend telling her that her father is going away. She doesn't need to be coached to keep secrets from me. She doesn't need to be used as a prop in your sick little family fantasy." Thomas knelt down to Emma's level, his voice gentle despite the rage burning in his chest. "Sweetheart, I need you to go upstairs to your room and close the door. No matter what you hear, don't come down until I come get you. Can you do that for Daddy?" Emma nodded solemnly, sensing the gravity of the moment even if she didn't understand it. She hugged Thomas tightly around the neck. "I love you, Daddy," she whispered. "I love you too, baby. More than anything in the whole world." After Emma's footsteps faded up the stairs, Thomas turned back to Roland and Rebecca. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller, more intimate, like a stage set for a play nobody wanted to perform. "Now then," Thomas said, his voice returning to that deadly quiet tone. "Let's discuss your proposal." Roland reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. "I think it would be better if we met in my office with proper representation." The business card hit the kitchen floor as Thomas grabbed Roland by the throat and slammed him against the refrigerator. The lawyer was taller than Thomas, but softer, unprepared for the casual violence of someone who'd grown up in Detroit's worst neighborhoods before clawing his way to respectability. "Tom," Rebecca screamed. "Stop it." 20 years, Thomas said conversationally, as if he wasn't choking a man. 20 years I've been building something. Working 16-hour days. Bleeding into engines. Saving every penny. Also my family could live somewhere safe and clean and good. Roland's face was turning red. His hands clawed at Thomas's wrist, but Thomas had spent 2 decades handling tools and machinery. His grip was iron. "And you thought you could just walk in and take it all? Take my business. Take my house. Take my daughter." Thomas's voice never rose, never lost its conversational tone. But mostly, Roland, you thought you could take it from someone who would just roll over and let it happen. Thomas released his grip suddenly. Roland slumped against the refrigerator, gasping and rubbing his throat. Here's what's going to happen, Thomas continued. You're going to withdraw these divorce papers. You're going to end your relationship with my wife. You're going to transfer to another law firm in another city. And you're never going to contact my family again. Roland straightened his tie with shaking hands. You can't assault me and then make demands. I'll have you arrested. You'll what? Thomas smiled that cold smile again. You'll call the police and tell them what exactly? That you were in another man's house, fucking his wife, corrupting his child, and trying to steal his life savings? I'm sure that will play well with the Bar Association. This is insane, Rebecca said. Tom, you can't just threaten people. I'm not threatening anyone, Thomas said mildly. I'm explaining consequences. Roland here is a smart man. He understands consequences, don't you, Roland? The lawyer was regaining his composure, his natural arrogance reasserting itself. You think you can intimidate me? I've handled cases against much more dangerous men than you. You're nobody special, Tom. Just another blue-collar guy who thinks he owns something he can't afford to lose. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. You're right about one thing. I am nobody special. I fix cars for a living. I change oil and replace brakes and do honest work with my hands. But you know what else I do, Roland? He paused, letting the silence stretch. I remember everything. Every detail. Every slight. Every person who ever tried to fuck me over. Thomas's voice dropped to a whisper. And I never, ever forgive. Something in his tone made Roland take a step backward. So here's what I'm going to do, Thomas continued. I'm going to find out everything about you. Where you live. Where you eat. Where you shop. Where you park your fancy Mercedes. I'm going to learn your routines, your weaknesses, your secrets. And then, when you least expect it, when you think you're safe, I'm going to destroy you. Completely. Permanently. You're talking about stalking. I'm talking about justice. Thomas picked up the divorce papers and tore them in half. See, you made one crucial mistake, Roland. You thought I was weak because I work with my hands. You thought I was stupid because I didn't go to law school. But mostly, you thought I was soft because I love my family. Thomas threw the torn papers at Roland's feet. You confused kindness with weakness. It's a mistake you'll only make once. Roland looked at Rebecca, clearly expecting her to say something, to defend him, to choose sides. But Rebecca was staring at her husband like she was seeing him for the first time, and what she saw scared her. This isn't over, Roland said finally, straightening his jacket. You can't threaten an officer of the court and expect. Get out. The words were spoken so quietly that Roland almost didn't hear them. But the weight behind them was unmistakable. I said get out. Now. Before I do something we'll both regret. Roland left. Thomas could hear the front door slam. Could hear the Mercedes engine start. Could hear his enemy retreating for now. Rebecca remained in the kitchen, tears streaming down her face. Tom, don't. Please, let me explain. There's nothing to explain. Thomas looked at his wife with the same expression he might give a stranger. You made your choice. You chose him. You chose his money and his promises and his lies. You chose to betray everything we built together. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. Thomas walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the rose garden Rebecca had tended so carefully. You want a divorce? Fine. You'll get one. But it won't be on his terms. It won't be on your terms. It will be on mine. What does that mean? Thomas turned to face his wife one last time. It means you should have been more careful who you chose to betray. Because I don't forgive, Rebecca. And I never forget. Chapter 5. The Art of War. Thomas spent the next 3 days planning with the methodical precision that had made his auto shop successful. He took vacation time from work, something that raised eyebrows since Thomas never took vacation, and devoted himself to research with the focused intensity of a general preparing for battle. Roland Westfield lived in a penthouse apartment downtown, drove a leased Mercedes SUV, and maintained a lifestyle that was slightly beyond his means. The lawyer was good at his job, but better at appearances, the type of man who valued image over substance. Thomas learned Roland's schedule by following him, learned his habits by observation, and learned his weaknesses by patience. More importantly, Thomas learned about Roland's ex-wife in California. Diane Westfield had been married to Roland for 12 years before discovering his affairs, plural. The divorce had been vicious, and Roland had used every legal trick to minimize his alimony payments. Diane had been left bitter, financially struggling, and very willing to talk to anyone who called claiming to be writing an article about unethical divorce attorneys. "He's a predator," Diane told Thomas over the phone, her voice still carrying anger 3 years after the divorce. "He specifically targets married women going through difficult times. He makes them feel special, understood, valued. Then he convinces them they deserve better than their current lives." "Sounds like quite an operation," Thomas said carefully. "Oh, it is. Roland doesn't just steal wives. He studies their finances first. He only goes after women with assets worth taking. The affair is just the setup for the real crime." Thomas felt pieces clicking into place. The real crime. Roland doesn't want to marry these women. He wants their money. He builds up their confidence, convinces them to leave their husbands, then slowly drains their divorce settlements through various schemes. Investment opportunities that never pan out. Business ventures that fail mysteriously. By the time they figure out what's happening, Roland's moved on to the next mark and they're left broke. Thomas thanked Diane and hung up, understanding finally what he was really fighting. Rebecca wasn't Roland's girlfriend. She was his next victim. The affair was just phase 1 of an elaborate con game designed to steal everything Thomas had earned. The realization should have made him feel better. Instead, it made him feel colder. Because Rebecca had still chosen to betray him. Even if she was being manipulated, she had made the decision to lie, to cheat, to use their daughter as a prop in someone else's scheme. Understanding Roland's motivation didn't excuse Rebecca's choices. Thomas spent the rest of the week putting his own plan into motion. First, he moved money. Not illegally. Thomas was many things, but stupid wasn't one of them. He liquidated some investments, restructured business accounts, and transferred funds to places where they would be harder to find during divorce proceedings. If Roland wanted to play financial games, Thomas would make sure the playing field was level. Second, he hired a private investigator. Not one of the fancy downtown firms that charged luxury rates, but a former police detective named Carmen Rodriguez who worked out of a strip mall office and specialized in catching cheating spouses. Carmen was thorough, discreet, and had no patience for lawyers who thought they were smarter than everyone else. "I'll get you photos, videos, financial records, the works," Carmen promised. "But what are you planning to do with all this evidence?" "I'm planning to destroy him," Thomas said simply. Carmen studied Thomas's face for a long moment. "That's not legal advice I can give you." "I'm not asking for legal advice." "Good. Because what you're describing sounds like revenge, not justice. Sometimes they're the same thing." Third, Thomas had a conversation with his brother Mike. "I need you to take Emma for a while," Thomas said. They were sitting in Mike's kitchen, drinking beer and pretending this was a normal Tuesday evening conversation. "Maybe a few weeks. Maybe longer." "How much longer?" "Until I'm finished." Mike was quiet for a long moment. "With Rebecca?" "With everyone." "Tom, whatever you're planning." "I'm not planning anything illegal." Thomas met his brother's eyes. "But things are going to get ugly. Emma doesn't need to see that." "What about Rebecca? Does she know you're planning to take Emma?" Thomas's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Rebecca lost the right to make decisions about Emma the moment she brought her boyfriend into our house. The moment she started coaching our daughter to lie to me." Mike nodded slowly. "When do you want me to pick her up?" "Tomorrow night. Tell Emma it's a fun sleepover that might last a little while." "And what do I tell Rebecca?" "Tell her she can see Emma on weekends. After she explains to our daughter why mommy doesn't live at home anymore." The next evening, Mike came for Emma as planned. Thomas helped pack her favorite clothes, her stuffed animals, and enough books to keep her occupied. Emma was excited about staying with Uncle Mike, who let her have ice cream for breakfast and taught her inappropriate card games. "How long are you staying with Uncle Mike?" Rebecca asked, clearly sensing something was wrong. "Until Daddy finishes his project," Emma said innocently. "Daddy has important work to do." Rebecca looked at Thomas over their daughter's head, fear creeping into her eyes. "What project?" "Just some repairs that need to be made," Thomas said. "Some things that are broken and need to be fixed." After Mike and Emma left, the house felt different. Emptier. More like a battlefield than a home. Rebecca tried to start a conversation several times that evening, but Thomas wasn't interested in talking. He was interested in waiting. Because Carmen had called that afternoon with interesting news about Roland's evening plans. Around 10 p.m., Thomas's phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. Going to bed early tonight. Headache. Thomas watched from the kitchen window as his wife's bedroom light went out. He waited another 30 minutes, then slipped out the back door and got into his truck. He'd removed the bulb from the interior light weeks ago and replaced his license plates with ones from a junk car at his shop. Roland's penthouse building had security cameras in the lobby, but not in the parking garage. Thomas had verified this during his surveillance. He'd also verified that Roland parked in the same spot every night, space 23A, close to the elevator, perfectly positioned for what Thomas had planned. Thomas sat in his truck for 2 hours, watching the garage, learning the patterns of late-night residents coming and going. At 12:47 a.m., a silver BMW pulled into the garage. At 1:15 a.m., a couple in their 70s returned from what looked like a late dinner. At 1:33 a.m., the garage was empty except for parked cars. Thomas got out of his truck and walked to Roland's Mercedes. The lawyer's SUV was immaculate, detailed and polished, worth more than most people made in a year. Thomas ran his hand along the hood, feeling the expensive paint, the precise engineering, the pride of ownership. Then he opened his toolbox. Chapter 6. Consequences. The next morning, Roland discovered that his Mercedes wouldn't start. The engine would turn over but wouldn't catch, a problem that Thomas had engineered by loosening specific connections and adjusting fuel mixture settings. It was the kind of issue that would baffle most mechanics and require expensive diagnostic work to identify. Thomas knew this because he'd called Roland's preferred luxury auto service, pretending to be a potential customer, and learned they charged $200 just to look at a car, plus labor that ran $150 per hour. Roland ended up being 3 hours late for work. He missed a court appearance. His day was ruined, his schedule destroyed, and his carefully maintained professional image tarnished. It was, Thomas reflected, a good start. But the car was just the opening move. Thomas had much bigger plans. That evening, Rebecca came home looking haggard and anxious. She'd been trying to reach Roland all day without success, and his absence had clearly rattled her. "Where's Emma?" was the first thing she asked. "With Mike. I told you that." "For how long?" Thomas shrugged. "Until things settled down." Rebecca sat down heavily at the kitchen table. "Tom, we need to talk." "About what?" "About us. About what's happening. About how to move forward." Thomas looked at his wife, really looked at her. She was still beautiful, still had that quality that had attracted him in the first place. But there was something hollow behind her eyes now, something calculating and cold. "There is no us, Rebecca. There's you, there's me, and there's a bunch of lawyers who are going to get rich off our divorce. It doesn't have to be that way." "Yes, it does." Thomas sat down across from her. "Because you made it that way. You brought another man into our home. You used our daughter as a prop in your affair. You planned to steal half of everything I've worked for and give it to your boyfriend. Roland isn't my." "Don't." Thomas's voice was quiet but final. "Don't lie to me anymore. I know about the hotel. I know about him coming here during the day. I know about the original divorce papers and how he helped you prepare them." Rebecca's face crumpled. "Tom, please. I made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can work through this. Some things can't be fixed, Rebecca. Some things are broken too badly to repair." "You don't mean that." "I mean every word." Thomas leaned back in his chair. "You want to know what's really sad? If you had just come to me and said you were unhappy, if you had said you wanted something different, we could have worked it out. Divorce, separation, whatever you needed. I would have been fair. I would have been generous. I still want that. But you didn't do that. You chose to lie. You chose to scheme. You chose to involve our daughter in your deception." Thomas's voice was getting colder with each word. "Worst of all, you chose to do it with a man who was planning to rob you blind the moment he got his hands on your money." Rebecca's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" asked Diane Westfield, Roland's ex-wife. "She'd be happy to tell you all about your boyfriend's methods." Thomas watched understanding dawn on Rebecca's face, watched her realize that she'd been played just as badly as he had. The difference was, he felt no sympathy for her. She'd made her choices with full knowledge that she was betraying her family. Whatever happened to her afterward was justice, not tragedy. Rebecca's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her face went white. "What is it?" Thomas asked. "Roland. He says we need to talk. Tonight. He sounds angry. Trouble in paradise?" Rebecca looked at Thomas with something approaching desperation. "What did you do?" "I didn't do anything to Roland." Thomas's smile was thin and sharp. Yet, an hour later, Roland's Mercedes pulled into the driveway. Thomas watched from the living room window as the lawyer stormed toward the front door, his face dark with rage. Rebecca. Roland's voice carried through the house as he burst through the front door without knocking. Where the hell have you been? I've been calling all day. My phone was on silent, Rebecca said, hurrying to meet him. What's wrong? You look. Your husband fucked with my car. Roland's eyes found Thomas, who was standing calmly in the living room doorway. $800 in diagnostic fees and repair work. $800 because this bastard can't accept that his marriage is over. I don't know what you're talking about, Thomas said mildly. Car trouble? That's unfortunate. Maybe you should buy American next time. Roland took a step toward Thomas, his hands clenched into fists. You think you're clever? You think some childish vandalism is going to scare me off? I think you should be more careful where you park, Thomas replied. Lots of crime in downtown garages these days. This isn't over. Yes, it is. The words came out so quietly that everyone in the room froze. Thomas stepped into the living room, moving with the calm deliberation of someone who had reached a final decision. It's over, Roland. Your little con game, your affair with my wife, your plan to steal my money, all of it ends tonight. You don't scare me, Roland said, but his voice lacked conviction. I should. Thomas smiled, and it was the most frightening expression Roland had ever seen. Because tomorrow morning, every lawyer in the city is going to receive a very interesting package. Photos of you and Rebecca together. Financial records showing your pattern of targeting married women. Testimony from your ex-wife about your methods. Roland's face went pale. You can't. I can. I have. And that's just the beginning. Thomas pulled an envelope from his pocket. This contains copies of everything Carmen Rodriguez has collected on you over the past week. Your routine, your apartment building's security schedule, your patterns of behavior. Thomas tossed the envelope at Roland's feet. You see, Roland, you made the same mistake everyone makes when they try to fuck with me. You assumed I was weak. You assumed I was stupid. You assumed I would just take it and walk away. Thomas's voice was getting quieter with each word. But I'm not weak. I'm not stupid. And I never, ever walk away. Roland bent to pick up the envelope with shaking hands. As he flipped through the photos and documents inside, his face went from pale to gray. How did you? I told you. I remember everything. And I never forgive. Thomas looked at Rebecca, who was pressed against the wall, watching the conversation with growing horror. Both of you are going to learn what that means. Roland straightened up, trying to regain his composure. You're talking about harassment. Stalking. These are crimes. So is adultery. So is conspiracy to commit fraud. So is using a child as an accessory to deception. Thomas shrugged. We're all criminals here, Roland. The difference is, I'm better at it than you are. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of Roland's phone buzzing. Then Rebecca's. Then Roland's again. You might want to check those, Thomas suggested. I imagine they're from colleagues who have some questions about the photos that started circulating an hour ago. Roland and Rebecca both looked at their phones simultaneously. Thomas watched their faces crumble as they read message after message, saw their professional and personal worlds collapsing in real time. This is, Roland started to say, this is what happens when you forget who you're dealing with, Thomas finished. And it's only the beginning. Chapter 7, The Hunter and the Hunted. The next 3 days passed like a fever dream. Roland's law firm suspended him pending investigation into his conduct. Rebecca was fired from her paralegal position after explicit photos of her and Roland surfaced on social media. The Bar Association opened an ethics inquiry. The local legal community, always hungry for scandal, devoured every detail with relish. Thomas went to work each day like nothing had happened, servicing cars and managing his shops with the same methodical efficiency he'd always shown. But in the evenings, he continued his campaign with surgical precision. Roland's credit cards started getting declined. His gym membership was canceled due to inappropriate behavior complaints. His favorite restaurant received an anonymous tip about his habit of not tipping service staff. His apartment building's management company got several noise complaints about loud parties that never actually happened. Each incident was small, explainable, deniable. But together, they created a pattern of chaos that followed Roland everywhere he went. Rebecca tried talking to Thomas twice. The first time, he simply walked away. The second time, he listened to her plead for mercy, for understanding, for a chance to make things right. When she finished, he looked at her with the expression of someone observing an interesting, but ultimately meaningless insect. "You're confused about something, Rebecca," he said. "You think this is about forgiveness. It's not. This is about consequences." "Tom, please. I know I made mistakes." "You didn't make mistakes. You made choices. You chose to lie to me every day for months. You chose to bring another man into our home. You chose to use our daughter to cover your tracks." Thomas's voice was perfectly calm. "I'm simply making sure you experience the appropriate consequences for those choices." "What about Emma? What about our daughter?" "Emma is fine. She's safe with Mike, away from whatever pathetic drama you and Roland are going to create when your little world finishes collapsing. She needs her mother. She needs stability. She needs honesty. She needs to be protected from people who would use her as a prop in their schemes." Thomas studied Rebecca's face. "You stopped being her mother the moment you decided your affair was more important than her well-being." That evening, Thomas received a call from Carmen Rodriguez. "Your boy Roland is getting desperate," she reported. "He hired a private investigator of his own. Wants evidence that you're harassing him. Find anything interesting?" "Nothing admissible. You've been very careful." Carmen paused. "But I've got to ask, how far are you planning to take this?" "As far as necessary." "That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're going to get." Carmen was quiet for a moment. "I've been doing this for 15 years, Tom. I've seen a lot of men go down paths they couldn't come back from. Just be smart about whatever you're planning." Thomas hung up and sat in his empty house, thinking about paths and consequences and the point of no return. He'd already crossed several lines he'd never thought he'd cross. The question was how many more he was willing to cross. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "We need to meet. Just you and me. No lawyers, no wives, no games. 1 hour. Riverside Park, East parking lot." It was unsigned, but Thomas knew who'd sent it. Roland was ready to negotiate. Thomas smiled. Roland still didn't understand the situation. He thought this was about winning and losing, about negotiation and compromise. He thought there was a deal to be made. Thomas drove to the park, arriving 15 minutes early to scope out the area. It was nearly empty, just a few joggers and an elderly man walking his dog. The east parking lot was isolated, surrounded by trees, perfect for a private conversation. Roland was already there when Thomas arrived, standing beside his repaired Mercedes like he was posing for a magazine ad. Even in crisis, the lawyer couldn't resist staging his appearance. "Tom," Roland nodded as Thomas approached. "Thanks for coming." "What do you want, Roland?" "I want to end this. Whatever game you're playing, whatever point you're trying to make, you've made it. You've cost me my job, my reputation, my credibility. You've won." Thomas studied the lawyer's face. Roland looked exhausted, stressed, like a man who hadn't slept in days. "Good. I haven't won anything," Thomas said. "I've just started evening the score." "What will it take?" Roland asked. "Money? I'll pay for your divorce attorney. Make sure you get a fair settlement. Rebecca and I will move away, start over somewhere else. You'll never see us again." "That's your offer? Money and distance." "It's a generous offer." Thomas laughed, and the sound made Roland take a step backward. "Roland, you still don't get it. This isn't about money. This isn't about my marriage. This isn't even about Rebecca." Thomas moved closer, and Roland retreated until his back was against his car. "This is about the fact that you thought you could steal from me and get away with it. I never stole anything. You stole my wife. You stole my daughter's sense of security. You stole months of my life while you planned your little con game." Thomas was standing close enough now that Roland could smell motor oil and honest sweat. "Most importantly, you stole my peace of mind. And that, Roland, is something I can never get back. So what happens now?" Thomas smiled, and Roland saw his own death in that expression. Now you learn what it means to mess with someone who has nothing left to lose." Thomas pulled something from his jacket pocket, a small digital recorder. "Did you know that Rebecca keeps a diary? Very detailed, very explicit. Names, dates, places, positions." Thomas held up the recorder. "She also talks in her sleep. Amazing what you can learn when someone trusts you completely." Roland's face went white. "You can't." "I can. I have. In fact, copies of these recordings are already in the hands of several very interested parties. Your ex-wife's attorney, for instance. Turns out Diane is considering a lawsuit against you for fraud during your divorce proceedings. These recordings should provide excellent evidence." Thomas put the recorder back in his pocket. But that's not the best part, Roland. The best part is what happens next week. What happens next week? Thomas's smile widened. You'll find out. But here's a hint. You might want to start looking for a new place to live. And a new city to live in. And maybe a new identity while you're at it. Thomas turned and walked back to his truck, leaving Roland standing alone in the parking lot, finally understanding that he'd picked a fight with someone who played by entirely different rules. As Thomas drove home, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Genuine happiness. Not satisfaction, not relief, but actual joy. Because the hunt was almost over, and the prey was finally beginning to understand what it meant to be caught. Chapter 8. The Final Move. Thomas spent Sunday morning at Mike's house, playing with Emma and pretending everything was normal. His daughter was happy, well-adjusted, and blissfully unaware that her parents' marriage had become a war zone. Mike kept giving Thomas concerned looks, but he didn't ask questions. Thomas appreciated that about his brother. Mike understood that some conversations happened when they needed to happen, not before. "Daddy, when am I coming home?" Emma asked while they built a fort out of couch cushions. "Soon, sweetheart. Daddy just needs to finish some work first." "What kind of work?" "The important kind. The kind that makes sure everything is safe and secure for you." Emma nodded solemnly, accepting this explanation with the faith that only 6-year-olds possessed. Thomas hugged his daughter tightly, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo and promising himself that whatever happened next, Emma would be protected. Monday morning brought news that made Thomas smile over his coffee. Roland Westfield had been arrested on Sunday night for drunk and disorderly conduct after causing a scene at an upscale restaurant downtown. According to the police report, Roland had accused the waitstaff of tampering with his food and had thrown a glass of wine at another patron. The charges were minor, but the mugshot made the local news. Thomas hadn't had anything to do with Roland's arrest, but he appreciated the timing. Desperate people made mistakes, and Roland was getting very desperate indeed. Rebecca called that afternoon, her voice shaking with barely controlled hysteria. "Tom, you have to stop this. Roland is falling apart. He's drinking too much. He's not sleeping. He's becoming paranoid." "Sounds like a personal problem," Thomas said. "This isn't just about us anymore. Roland is talking about doing something drastic. He's scared, and scared people do stupid things." "What kind of stupid things?" "I don't know. But he keeps talking about how you've ruined his life, how you've taken everything from him, how he has nothing left to lose." Thomas felt a cold chill run down his spine. He'd been so focused on hunting Roland that he hadn't considered the possibility of Roland hunting him back. "Where is he now?" "I don't know. He hasn't answered his phone since yesterday." "Tom, I'm really worried he might." The line went dead. Thomas tried calling back, but Rebecca's phone went straight to voicemail. Thomas drove to Rebecca's sister's house, where she'd been staying since moving out. The driveway was empty, no sign of Rebecca's Honda or Roland's Mercedes. He tried the front door, locked. He peered through windows, dark and empty. His phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello, Tom." Roland's voice was slurred, thick with alcohol and something else. "Something dangerous." "Where are you, Roland?" "Someplace private. Someplace where we can have a real conversation without interruption." "What do you want?" "I want you to understand something, Tom. You think you're smart. You think you've won. But you made one crucial mistake." Thomas was already moving toward his truck, keys in hand. "What mistake?" "You forgot that desperate men are capable of anything. And you made me very, very desperate." The line went dead. Thomas tried calling back. The number was blocked. He tried Rebecca's phone again, still voicemail. He called Mike to make sure Emma was safe. She was, but Mike could hear the tension in Thomas's voice. "What's going on?" Mike asked. "I may have pushed someone too far," Thomas admitted. "Keep Emma inside tonight. Lock the doors. If anyone comes around asking questions, call the police first and me second." "Tom, what have you done?" "What I had to do. But I may have miscalculated the consequences." Thomas drove through the city for 2 hours, checking every place he could think of where Roland might take Rebecca. The lawyer's apartment building, the hotel where they'd met, the law firm, even the restaurant where Roland had been arrested. Nothing. At 9 p.m., his phone buzzed with a text message. "Riverside Park. East parking lot. Come alone, or Rebecca gets hurt." Thomas stared at the message, understanding finally that the game had changed. This was no longer about revenge or justice or consequences. This was about survival. He drove to the park slowly, thinking through possibilities and outcomes. Roland was drunk, desperate, and probably armed. Rebecca was either a willing participant or an unwilling hostage. Either way, Thomas was walking into a trap. But he was going anyway, because despite everything Rebecca had done, despite all the lies and betrayals, she was still Emma's mother. And Thomas would not let his daughter grow up knowing that her father had abandoned her mother when she needed help. The east parking lot was empty except for Roland's Mercedes, parked in the same spot where they'd met days earlier. Thomas parked 50 yards away and approached on foot, every sense alert for danger. Roland was leaning against his car, drinking from a bottle of expensive whiskey. He was disheveled, unshaven, wearing the same clothes he'd had on in his mugshot. But his eyes were clear and focused, tracking Thomas's approach with predatory intensity. "Where's Rebecca?" Thomas asked. "Safe. For now." Roland took another drink. "You know, Tom, I've been thinking about our conversation the other day. About consequences and choices and people getting what they deserve. Where is she, Roland? You were right about something. I am a predator. I do target vulnerable women. I do manipulate them for money." Roland's smile was sharp and broken. "But you know what? I'm good at it. Really good. And I was having a very successful career until you decided to play detective." Thomas moved closer, noting the way Roland's hand rested near his jacket pocket. "This doesn't have to escalate, doesn't it?" Roland laughed, and the sound was harsh and bitter. "You've destroyed my career, my reputation, my future. You've made it impossible for me to practice law anywhere in the state. You've cost me everything I've worked for. You cost yourself everything when you decided to steal from me." "I didn't steal anything." Roland's voice rose to a shout. "I provided a service. I helped unhappy women escape unsatisfying marriages. I gave them what they wanted, freedom, excitement, a chance at something better. And then you robbed them blind. And then I helped them invest their money in opportunities that didn't work out. That's not stealing, Tom. That's just business." Thomas was close enough now to see the madness lurking behind Roland's eyes, the desperate rationalization of a man who'd convinced himself that his victims had deserved what happened to them. "Where's Rebecca?" Thomas asked again. Roland reached into his jacket and pulled out a small pistol, chrome-plated, probably expensive, definitely loaded. He held it casually, like it was a phone or a wallet. "Rebecca is learning about consequences too, Tom. She's learning what happens when you pick the wrong man to trust. If you hurt her, you'll what? Destroy my life? Ruin my career? Take away everything I care about." Roland laughed again. "Too late, Tom. You already did all that." The gun was pointing at Thomas now, steady despite Roland's intoxication. "But here's the thing about having nothing left to lose," Roland continued. "It makes a man very, very dangerous. Because when you've lost everything anyway, what's the point of restraint?" Thomas stood perfectly still, calculating distances and possibilities. Roland was 10 feet away, drunk but alert, armed and clearly past the point of rational thought. The smart play was to talk him down, to find a way to de-escalate the situation. But Thomas Brennan had never been interested in smart plays when someone threatened his family. "You're right about one thing, Roland," Thomas said calmly. "Men with nothing to lose are very dangerous." Then he smiled, and Roland saw something in that expression that made his blood freeze. "The difference is, I learned that lesson a long time ago. You're just figuring it out now." Chapter 9. The Price of Justice. What happened next lasted less than 30 seconds, but would define the rest of Thomas Brennan's life. Roland, despite his drunken state, was quick enough to track Thomas's movement as he dove to the left. The first gunshot split the night air, missing Thomas by inches and shattering the windshield of a parked car. The second shot went wide as Thomas rolled behind a concrete barrier. But Thomas hadn't survived 3 tours in Afghanistan by hiding behind cover. While Roland was firing wild shots into the darkness, Thomas was moving, fast, silent, and deadly. He'd learned urban combat from the best instructors the Army had to offer, and those lessons had never left him. Roland never saw Thomas coming. The impact drove both men to the ground, Roland's gun skittering across the asphalt into the darkness. They rolled, fought, each man driven by pure desperation. Roland had youth and height on his side, but Thomas had experience and the cold fury of someone defending his family. The fight ended when Thomas wrapped his hands around Roland's throat and squeezed with the methodical pressure of someone who'd done this before. Roland clawed at Thomas's wrists, gasped for air, tried to buck him off. But Thomas had made his decision, and Thomas Brennan never changed his mind once a decision was made. Roland Westfield died in a parking lot at 10:47 p.m. on a Monday night, with Thomas Brennan's hands around his throat and no witnesses to see justice being served. Thomas sat back on his heels, breathing hard, looking down at the body of the man who'd tried to destroy his life. He felt no satisfaction, no relief, no regret. He felt empty, like something essential had been hollowed out of him and could never be replaced. Then he remembered Rebecca. It took 20 minutes to find her. Roland had tied her up and left her in the trunk of his Mercedes, gagged but unharmed. She was terrified, crying, clearly expecting to die. When Thomas opened the trunk and cut her bonds, she fell into his arms, sobbing with relief. "Tom, oh God, Tom, he was going to kill me. He said he was going to kill you first, then me, then himself. He said if he couldn't have his life back, nobody could have anything." Thomas held his wife, his ex-wife, and felt absolutely nothing. No love, no anger, no forgiveness, no hate. Just emptiness where those emotions used to live. "It's over," he said simply. The next hour was the most important of Thomas's life. He called 911, reported that he'd been attacked by an armed man who'd kidnapped his wife, and that he'd defended himself when the man tried to kill them both. He mentioned Roland's recent arrest, his drinking problem, his professional troubles, his threats. When the police arrived, they found exactly what Thomas wanted them to find: a desperate man who'd snapped under pressure, an innocent victim who'd been kidnapped, and a husband who'd done what any reasonable person would do when faced with a man trying to murder his family. The gun was still loaded. Roland's blood alcohol level was 3 times the legal limit. His phone contained dozens of increasingly unhinged voicemails he'd left for Rebecca over the past 2 days. The scene told a clear story of self-defense against a dangerous, unstable individual. The investigation took 6 weeks. The district attorney never seriously considered filing charges. The local media portrayed Thomas as a hero who'd saved his family from a deranged predator. Roland Westfield was remembered as a cautionary tale about what happened when successful people self-destructed under pressure. Rebecca tried to reconcile. She begged for forgiveness, promised to go to counseling, swore she'd learned her lesson about trust and loyalty and the value of family. She painted herself as another of Roland's victims, manipulated and used by a master predator. Thomas listened to everything she had to say. Then he handed her divorce papers. Fair, reasonable, generous even. Half of everything they'd built together, shared custody of Emma, no demands for alimony or support. Clean, simple, final. "I don't understand," Rebecca said. "I thought, after what happened, after you saved me." "I didn't save you for us," Thomas said. "I saved you for Emma. So our daughter wouldn't have to grow up knowing her mother died because of her father's revenge. But we could start over. We could rebuild." "No, we can't. Because every time I look at you, I see someone who chose to betray everything we had together. And every time you look at me, you'll see someone capable of killing a man with his bare hands." Rebecca signed the papers. She moved to another state, started over with a new job and a new life. She calls Emma every week, visits every other month, and sends birthday cards with checks inside. She's a good mother from a distance, which is probably the best either of them could hope for. Emma thrives. She lives with Thomas in the house on Maple Street, helps him tend Rebecca's old rose garden, and shows no signs of trauma from the events that destroyed her parents' marriage. Children are resilient, and Emma had been shielded from the worst of it. Thomas never remarried. He dates occasionally, but every relationship ends the same way, with women who realize that there's a part of Thomas Brennan that's permanently closed off, a section of his heart that went dark the night he killed Roland Westfield and never lit up again. His auto shops prosper. He's considered a pillar of the community, a success story, a man who overcame tragedy and built something lasting. People respect him, trust him, bring him their problems because they know Thomas Brennan can fix anything. They're right. Thomas can fix anything. But some things, once broken, can never be made whole again. And some repairs leave scars that last forever. Thomas learned that lesson in a parking lot on a Monday night, with blood on his hands and justice in his heart. It was the most expensive education he'd ever received, and the only one he'd never had to pay for twice. Because Thomas Brennan never forgets. And he never, ever forgives. But sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet and Emma is sleeping safely in her room, Thomas wonders if the price of his revenge was worth what it cost him. He wonders if there might have been another way, a different choice, a path that didn't lead through violence and death. Then he looks at his daughter's pictures on the mantelpiece, thinks about the life she's living and the future she'll have, and knows that he'd make the same choices again. Every single one of them. Some things are worth any price. Some people deserve whatever consequences find them. And some men learn too late that there are lines you don't cross and people you don't try to destroy. Thomas Brennan had taught Roland Westfield that lesson permanently, and he'd learned a few lessons of his own in the process. The most important one: justice doesn't heal. It doesn't restore what was lost or fix what was broken. Justice just ensures that the guilty pay the price they owe. And sometimes, that has to be enough. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.